I'm beefing with Manny again. Hi everyone, welcome to the second part of my Diary of a Wimpy Kid retrospective. Today we will be covering books 6 to 10 of the series. If you want to hear my thoughts about the first 5 books, you can watch the video on my channel, or you can click on one of the cards up there. It should be up there somewhere. As a refresher, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is a children's book series written and illustrated by Jeff Kinney. The series follows Greg Heffley, a young man just trying to survive middle school, and he gets up to a lot of shenanigans. In his adventures, Greg is joined by his best friend, Rowley Jefferson, his mom Susan, his older brother Rodrick, his younger brother Manny, and his father Frank. The Wimpy Kid series is immensely successful. It is currently the 4th best-selling book series of all time, which is an incredible feat. The series itself has over 20 books, including spin-offs like Rowley's own diary series, as well as companion books like A Blank Diary, and books chronicling the making of the movies. The books we'll discuss today are Cabin Fever, released November 2011, The Third Wheel, published November 2012, Hard Luck, published November 2013, The Long Haul, released November 2014, and finally, Old School, which was released in November 2015. Right off the bat, we can see a more consistent time frame in which new Wimpy Kid books are published, which is around end of October or early November. My guess is the publisher is probably trying to capitalize on the school holidays, so maybe kids will ask their parents to get them the new book for Christmas, and generally since it's winter holidays where children have more spare time, maybe parents will be more inclined to buy books for their kids so they wouldn't have to spend time so much on their screens, you know? Maybe just a thought. I don't know. I'm not a parent. But in general, I think it might be a good time for sales, I guess. Anyway, without delaying any further, let's get into my thoughts and analysis. Part 1, my thoughts. Something I forgot to mention in the other retrospective because I got to cut up on how long the video was getting. I like the way these books capture how mundane middle school is. The adventures Greg and Rowley get up to can be a bit over the top at times, but I feel they're always grounded in some kind of reality. Maybe there's also a bit of like nostalgic sentiment for me because when I was young, I did the things that Greg and Rowley did in these books. Like they make their own comics or newspaper, they try to run their own little bazaar to get some money, and they join after-school clubs, but they base their decisions on what is more convenient for them, not necessarily on what's good for them. And I'm like, hey, I did some of these stuff too. That's pretty funny. Also, given the time period these books were written in, phones and social media weren't as prevalent as they are these days in kids' lives. In fact, in the older books, the Heffleys only had one computer or laptop, and they had to take turns using it. However, we do see a shift that reflects the changes in kids' electronic consumption in the subsequent books. Like, for example, in Old School, which was published in 2015, kids being attached to technology is one of the main plot points. So it was kind of interesting to see how this shift happens in these books, and I'm sort of curious to see how this is tackled in the other books, especially the newer books. We'll see, I guess. With that said, in these older books, because Greg and Rowley do not have phones, they do a lot of activities outside in the great outdoors. They play in the woods, they make lemonade stands, they have snowball fights, and I don't know, I think there's just something really wholesome about seeing them doing activities that's not tied to like doom scrolling or secluding themselves in their homes, which I'm guilty of too, honestly. Like, I could be going outside, joining a running club, but here I am making a Wimpy Kid video. But back to our discussion, as I said before, the books do such a good job of showing the mundanity of middle school, but it also shows how urgent some of these situations can get for the kids. Sometimes it feels like the situations you get up to in middle school can be life-ending because I guess your emotions are sort of like heightened in middle school and in high school, and it doesn't help that you're still trying to figure yourself out and trying to figure things out. So everything feels, you know, like bigger than they actually are. But then when the situation sort of like come to a conclusion or come to an end, it turns out to not be so bad. and then life just goes on after that. And I like the way that Jeff Kinney portrays this kind of like tension and the relief that comes after the tension. I like how these books capture the innocence, but at the same time also captures the like urgency and how dramatic these things can get when you are in that situation as a kid. The wholesomeness of these books also caught me off guard because I'm so used to watching teen shows like Gossip Girl or Teen Wolf, and I mean like they're set in high school, but like still, you know, like with these teen shows like Euphoria, right? These kids' lives are not like my lived experience. I don't think my high school was that dramatic. So to see something more, you know, like not Euphoria and something more like Greg and other kids complaining and banding together to get better toilet paper in the bathrooms is nice to me, because that's similar to the reality that I lived in when I was in middle school and high school, rather than whatever is happening in Euphoria or in Gossip Girl. Like again, these books capture how mundane middle school or high school can get. Or I don't know, maybe I'm just boring. Don't let me know in the comments. I don't want comments saying I'm boring. Anyway, my immediate thoughts after reading books 6 to 10 is I still stand by my criticism of the previous books that I think the books feel disjointed. Honestly, I don't mean this as an insult or a slight at all. I do think the random and disjointed nature works for these books because it does genuinely feel like you are reading diary entries. Even if Greg claims that he is writing these diaries, journals, so these journals can become his autobiography, at the end of the day, these are still journal entries in universe. There are no editors editing Greg's journal, so it makes sense that they feel disjointed because this is just a kid writing journal entries. However, I think books 6 to 10 are better at blending the stories with a more cohesive theme compared to the first 5 books. If you recall, the Wimpy Kid series used to be a webcomic with daily entries. If I'm correct, I haven't read the webcomic, but I skimmed through it. The first 3 books were essentially the webcomic entries compiled and edited into 3 books. I do like the first 3 books, but I also feel like those books read more like a collection of funny gags. And this makes sense because in the Wimpy Kid official website, in Jeff Kinney's bio, it mentions that he initially wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. This explains the first few books. Because of his initial aspirations, Jeff Kinney writes strong one-off stories with good punchlines. There might be a semblance of a theme tying those books together, but I feel like it is only around Dog Days that the book started feeling more cohesive. Even then, Dog Days still had the collection of funny gags problem from the previous books. But since Dog Days is about summer vacation, Jeff Kinney could get away with this problem as long as the gags are about summer. So the book still feels a bit more cohesive to me. But in my opinion, Jeff Kinney is maturing as an author as he writes more of these Wimpy Kid books. Some of these subsequent novels that I just read, I actually prefer them than the previous 5 books because it explores Greg in a more layered way. And if you watch my previous video, you will know that I like Greg as a character. To me, Greg is very fascinating, and Jeff Kinney does an excellent job really creating a character that feels like an actual middle schooler. Like, he's frustrating, but he's realistic. In books 6 to 10 as well, you see that Greg is not the sociopath that people claim he is. He is genuinely a kid, and he is selfish. But in these books, in some instances, you can see him taking accountability too. In this video, I would like to take the time to really talk about Greg because the thing is, the books are fun, but I do think without a strong main character like Greg, the books just wouldn't hit as hard. Without Greg in these books, it'll feel like you're just reading setup, punchline, setup, punchline, and repeat. The only reason these books work is because Greg is such a good character. But what makes a good character good? Part 2, wants and needs. Whenever I'm in a writer's room, writers always talk about wants and needs. And it's cliche, but they are great tools to shape your characters and to telegraph their journeys. The character's wants is essentially, what the character wants at that moment. Like maybe at this moment, I want to eat some oatmeal. And the character's needs is not necessarily something that they might want, but it's something that they need at that period of time. So maybe I want to eat oatmeal, but what I really need to eat is rice because I just had diarrhea and I should be eating something that could calm my stomach, but I am stubborn, so I will be eating oatmeal instead. But that's the difference, right? Like there's wants and then there's needs, and sometimes they do not align. And when they do not align, that's when characters are probably most interesting, and that's where their journey comes from. The character's growth usually comes from accepting that their wants are just wants and their needs are actually what they needed. It's kind of like the treasure turns out to be the friends you made along the way. sort of thing. Even if Greg, at the end of these books, do not have like big epiphanies, he acknowledges the outcome that he received is not as bad as he thought it would be. And for a middle schooler, this is the next best thing. So let's explore Greg's wants and needs in each of these books. 2A. Cabin Fever. This book is set around winter and Christmas time, as evident with how the book opens with Greg talking about Santa and gifts. For most of the book, I can confidently say that Greg was very fixated on getting good gifts. When Greg became addicted to this game called Crazy Pets, where you take care of pets, sort of like Neopets, I guess, Greg's motivation shifted into pretty much wanting money, so he can buy the Crazy Pets in-game currency to buy items for his pet. This money becomes his want in a nutshell. He tries to get money from his family for Christmas, or from creating a bazaar, or from asking for money from his fellow churchgoers. So what happens with the last one is Greg's church was doing this giving tree program where churchgoers can take a tag stating items that people in need, and Greg pretended to be someone in need, so he wrote down on the tag and he asked for money. Greg, come on! However, Greg's need in this book is to realize how caring and nurturing he can be. We see these nurturing Greg seeds planted throughout the book through how he got super attached to this baby alive type doll called Alfredo. Susan got this doll for Greg so he can prepare for Manny's arrival. Initially, Greg didn't like the doll, but he ended up really enjoying taking care of Alfredo. And then we also see Greg doing such a good job taking care of his crazy pet, and this all culminates in several instances where Greg has to be sacrificial. First, Greg and Rowley wanted to promote their bazaar by putting up posters outside of school, but after they put up the posters, it rained and the rainwater washed away the colors from the poster boards and it stained the school walls. Greg told Rowley not to say anything to the authorities, but Rowley cracked and wrote an anonymous tip saying, "Me and Greg HEFFLEY did it." Surprisingly, Greg did not rat out Rowley, and he ended up cleaning the school walls by himself. Second, Greg took care of Manny when Susan was unable to, after Manny smashed Susan's glasses. God, I hate Manny so much in this book. Lastly, Greg went to church to check if anyone took his giving tree tag, where he requested money, right? And that money is to be placed under the recycling bin outside at the back of the church. It had been snowing a lot, so Greg had to scoop up the snow to get to the recycling bin, like he needs to clear the path. And obviously, there was no money, but his random act of kindness allowed the church to run the soup kitchen in the middle of winter because Greg essentially cleared the path for people to be able to go in. People couldn't see Greg properly when he was doing this, but people lauded this mysterious juvenile who brought this Christmas miracle. Overall, this book showed that Greg cared more than he is willing to admit. Sure, he is selfish at times, but there are moments where he is not. 2B, the third wheel. The third wheel opens interestingly. Greg recounted memories from when he was in the womb. Don't know how he remembered all of that, all the way to his birth. Something I honed in on when I was reading this opening is the fact that most of the time, Greg received hand-me-downs from Rodrick, and it is very rare for Greg to receive something that was not pre-owned. Like, Greg even wore Rodrick's old underwear. Anyway, the school was planning to have a Valentine's Day dance, and Greg wanted to get a date. A bulk of this book is dedicated to Greg's attempts to get that date. That's his one, a date. At the end, Greg ended up going with a girl named Abigail and Rowley. Abigail initially was going with her boyfriend, but they suddenly broke up, and Abigail still had a dress but no one to go with, and Rowley told Greg maybe she could be Greg's date. But it seemed a bit awful to be like, "Hey girl, let's go to this dance romantically right after you broke up with your boyfriend." So Greg had this plan to bring Rowley in. So it's like, let's go as a friend group, me, you, and Rowley. But secretly, Greg was hoping to charm Abigail by the end of the dance. Things got messy because Greg saw a red dot on Rowley's face and he became scared that Rowley might have chickenpox because the chickenpox has been going around at school. But Greg cannot technically tell Rowley to stay back because Mr. Jefferson is driving them. So there's no way that Mr. Jefferson would drive Greg and Abigail without his son, right? Anyhow, there was a whole bunch of shenanigans where Greg was being Greg, Rowley was being Rowley, Abigail was being a middle schooler, and in short, the date went horribly. By the end of the dance, Abigail ended up bonding more with Rowley, and Greg was left in the dust, and Greg ended up with chickenpox too. The kicker is, Rowley didn't even have chickenpox, it was a pimple. It's a bit hard to tell what Greg's need is in this book because I really resonated with Greg's experience of getting hand-me-downs. I'm also a second child and I am grateful that my case is not as bad as Greg, but there's still this sense of like I'm getting leftovers from my older siblings up until a point where I was able to, kind of like get my own things. Tell me if I'm projecting, guys, but I wonder if Greg's need in this book is to be chosen or to be given the opportunity to be chosen. But the thing is, when Greg was in a way chosen by Abigail and Rowley is as much in this as Abigail is, okay. So when Greg was chosen by these two people to go to the dance with, Greg unwittingly self-sabotaged. And while it's not technically just him that ruined the night, Greg definitely had a big part in ruining his own night. So I don't know if this is Greg's need. But even if the whole night was bad, I suppose it wasn't all bad because when Greg got the chickenpox, he got to stay home with no one in the house. He was able to take a bubble bath and it was low-key nice to him because Greg likened it to how he felt when he was in his mother's womb, which was the most comfortable that he ever felt. So I wonder if Greg's need is to have something of his own because again, the things that he owned had been Rodrick's hand-me-downs, or it had been something that he had to share with others. But this chickenpox thing allowed him to have something of his own. So maybe that's his need? Not to get chickenpox, but to have something of his own? I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. 2C, Hard Luck. I actually like this book the most out of the whole bunch. Greg is most likable in the second half of this book for me because he owned up to his mistakes. Interestingly, this book felt like a direct continuation to The Third Wheel. After the dance, Abigail and Rowley started dating. So this whole book revolved around Greg dealing with Rowley spending less time with him and spending more time with Abigail. Greg's want in this book can be boiled down to he just wants someone to boss around, whether it was someone to do his homework or someone to walk in front of him to scout for poop on the ground. These are all things that Rowley did, by the way, before Rowley got a girlfriend. What Greg didn't realize was he was actually really impacted by the loss of this friendship and connection. He was incredibly lonely to the point that he sought out different ways to find people. Like Greg befriended a boy named Fregley that Greg didn't like in the first place. And then Greg also joined different after-school clubs, which wasn't something that Greg was interested in, but he was just desperate to find people to hang out with. Greg's need in this book is to examine his relationship with others, specifically his relationship with Rowley, because Greg didn't treat Rowley as a friend, but as a butler. Greg also learned to put in the work in this book. Greg had been doing so badly at school to the point that the teachers considered sending him to summer school, and that was a wake-up call for Greg because he heard at summer school they don't turn on the air conditioning to save up on money, and Greg didn't want that because Greg famously loves air conditioning, okay? Because of the threat of summer school, Greg stepped up and tried his best to catch up with his homework, and he did it all on his own, unlike what he had been doing in the past. He even worked past 11 p.m. to meet the deadline of his science fair project. It was nice to see, for once, Greg actually being responsible. At the end, Abigail broke up with Rowley because it turned out that Abigail was only using Rowley to make her ex-boyfriend jealous, and this gives an opening for Greg to resume his relationship with Rowley. However, the work Greg put into being more responsible and catching up on his schoolwork was significant, because without that work, Greg would absolutely take Rowley back, tell Rowley, I told you so, and insist Rowley do his schoolwork. But since Greg already did all of that and all of that on his own, it allowed him to examine whether or not he actually liked Rowley's company without the bossing around Rowley part of the relationship. And the conclusion was, Greg did like Rowley's company. I think it took a lot for Greg to not throw the whole situation at Rowley's face and make fun of him for it, and this showed Greg's growth. I like the line that Greg ended the book with, which is, I'm sure me and Rowley will get in another fight somewhere down the road, and then we'll go through this drama all over again. But for now, we're good. 2D, The Long Haul. With The Long Haul, I'm a bit about it. I still think it's incredibly funny, and I think it might actually be the funniest out of this whole bunch, but it's just too wacky for me. I know these Wimpy Kid books have wacky moments, but I feel there's still a sense of like realism and groundedness to them, but The Long Haul is just too outlandish for me. I don't know if this book is like realistic to a lot of people, but I've never had a holiday turn out this badly. Maybe because my family is so paranoid, so we plan a lot. And maybe that's the case. You know, there's a whole point in this book that the road trip was unplanned, and maybe that's why the road trip really turned out badly. The only instance of a really bad road trip that I went on was I was traveling with my friends on this like 10-hour road trip, and our car broke down in the middle of it, and we had to call the insurance company. The insurance company then sent a person to fix the car, and we ended up driving for about like 13 hours instead of 10 hours. But it wasn't as bad as the Heffley's road trip. I don't know. Again, like, let me know in the comments if your holiday ever turned out as bad as the Heffleys in this book, or just let me know about your worst family road trip. I don't know. Leave comments, guys. Leave comments. With that said, my analysis of Greg's wants and needs for this book is really impacted because of this. I would say that maybe Greg's want is to go home and not spend the summer on this road trip, and his need is most likely he needs to recognize how important it is to spend time with his family. But with how bad the road trip turned out, it's hard not to agree with Greg. I mean, yes, the books are from Greg's perspective, so there's this like chance that Greg probably exaggerated the stories, but they still sound really bad. I'll say though that this family definitely made memories. The thing is, with this book, I feel like there's much more emphasis on the comedy and the gags rather than the character development. And the gags were absolutely funny. Like, they have some of the best jokes in this book, but I don't want that in sacrifice of the character development. In the end, I didn't feel like Greg had any lessons to learn. And I'm not saying that he needed big lessons for these books to work, but I'm just saying that there needs to be some point to the adventures, and Greg need to at least learn subtly about something. For me, I get attached more to the characters, so it's more important for me to see them grow rather than to see them be props to a funny gag. And for that reason, I do not like The Long Haul that much, even if I feel it's still pretty funny. 2E, Old School. Old School is definitely better to me than The Long Haul. It felt more grounded, and of course there's still wacky stuff happening, but it wasn't as bad as The Long Haul because this one actually explored character and relationships. I would say the main theme of this book is Greg's reliance on comfort, not only in terms of technology like electronics or baby wipes, but also stuff like just not spending time outdoors because he says like it would be too much for a modern boy like him. In this book, Greg tried to avoid his mom's initiative to get people to not use their gadgets for 48 hours and do community service instead. And Greg also tried to avoid going on this week-long trip with his school to a place called Hardscrabble Farms. Greg's want in this book is a bit all over the place, but I wouldn't say that's a bad thing because I think the wants just evolved as the story went along. In the first half, Greg probably just wanted to survive these people imposing these no electronics policy, but in the second half of the book, after an escalation of events that led to Greg causing a small flood in his house and a fender bender with his family's car, Greg just wanted to escape his father's wrath. So Greg decided to go to Hardscrabble Farms in hopes that when he returned, his father would be a bit more chill and less angry about the messes that Greg created. I think the biggest thing the book was trying to convey is sometimes you have to give up comfort in order to make breakthroughs. This was Greg's need, to remove the distractions in his life like technology and comfort so he could pay more attention to the people around him. Initially, Greg didn't want to go to Hardscrabble Farms because he didn't want to be away from comfort. But if Greg hadn't gone to Hardscrabble Farms, he would not realize how similar he is to Frank, and I think this is where the book is strong for me. Throughout the book, there were hints to how Frank and Greg were more similar than they let on. Frank had a tendency to exaggerate the stories from his youth, and we didn't know this until Frank's dad came over to stay with the family and teased Frank about this. This is similar to the way that Greg exaggerated his stories in his journals, right? Jeff Kinney drove home the parallels in Hardscrabble Farms. In the beginning, Greg's cabin chaperone was Mr. Jefferson, Rowley's father. When the campers were making fire, they needed kindling and no one knew what kindling was, so they brought anything that could be thrown into the fire. And Rowley accidentally brought poison ivies because he thought they were weeds. When Rowley tossed those poison ivy in the fire, Mr. Jefferson inhaled the fumes, and then Rowley and Mr. Jefferson got terribly ill from, the fumes and from touching the poison ivy, so they had to go home. Frank was called in as a last-minute replacement for Mr. Jefferson, and of course, Frank wasn't too happy about this. As it turned out, Frank went to Hardscrabble Farms when he was Greg's age too, so, the whole thing was triggering for Frank. Throughout this trip, the kids and teachers were talking about this mythical horror figure called Silas Scratch. The stories varied, but essentially, he's a farmer living on Hardscrabble Farm's grounds, and he has these really long nails, and he roams the farm to harm people. One night, Greg went into the woods to get more firewood, but he had to venture further because everyone had picked the wood around the immediate area. During this, Greg stumbled upon this ominous shed, and it looked like it could belong to Silas Scratch. Greg was scared, but he was also too curious, so he went into the shed and found a nice bathroom. And someone was in there. And it was Frank! When Frank was at Hardscrabble Farms when he was young, the bathroom situation was much worse than Greg's situation right then. Frank and his classmates had to share one outhouse, and to shower they had to go to the river. One day, Frank was doing the exact same thing Greg was doing, which was looking for firewood in the deepest parts of the woods because people picked up the firewood around the immediate vicinity of the campgrounds, right? That was when Frank stumbled upon the shed, and this shed was usually used by people who maintain the farms during winter times. Frank wanted to keep the shed and the bathroom to himself, so he created Silas Scratch and began spreading rumors about Silas Scratch. In fact, Frank was surprised that Silas Scratch was still talked about to this day. As it turned out, Greg and Frank were more similar than they thought. Greg acknowledged that creating Silas to keep people away from the bathroom was something that he would have done himself. I thought this was a nice twist and a great way to end the book. I appreciated this exploration of Greg and Frank's relationship, especially because I don't think their relationship is delved into as much as I wanted. I would say Greg's need in this book is realizing that comfort and technology are created for a reason, yes, but they cannot be a crutch. If Greg had remained home, he would not have realized how similar he is to his dad, which I think both of them really needed. It's not like their relationship is that bad, but it's not the best either. They could use a bit more bonding. This revelation also reframes the way Frank treats Greg, in my opinion. Frank might see a lot of himself in Greg, and when Frank expresses disappointment in Greg, is it because he knows Greg can be better and live up to more potential than he's already doing right now? Or is this self-loathing that he is seeing his own flaws reflected back to him through his son? Part 3. Final thoughts. After writing Greg for many years, I think Jeff Kinney is mastering how to remain true to Greg's voice while still giving him subtle character development. However, I cannot really say the same with the other characters. I feel like they remain the same throughout the books. For example, even if I raved about the plot twist in Old School, we didn't really see any reaction from Frank, or we were not told of his reaction, at least by Greg. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that we are in Greg's head since we are reading his journals, but I still feel like there could be ways to show the development of the other characters to us readers too. But anyway, as always, I still enjoyed my reread of these books. I think when I was young, I read all the way until The Long Haul, and from here on out, this is uncharted territory, so I'm excited to read these other books without the nostalgia of reading these books previously, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. If you've read these 5 books, can you let me know which one was your favorite? I think mine would be Hard Luck from this bunch, but leave a comment and we can talk about it. If you like this video, press the like button or share it, please. Engage with it overall because that would be super meaningful to me. I also work really hard on this retrospective. Like I was reading 5 books a week. 5 books. And maybe consider subscribing to this channel too for more video essays and more of this Wimpy Kid retrospective. Apart from that, goodbye and have a good night, have a good day, or whenever you are watching this video. Bye!